Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Dr. Melanie Wilson, who is a Christian psychologist turned homeschooling mother of six graduates. Melanie is the host of the Homeschool Sanity Show and author of Grammar Galaxy and the Training Aliens curriculum. Melanie, I am so delighted to chat with you today. Could you please tell us a little bit about your family and your own background with homeschooling?
All right, wonderful. I am just thrilled to talk with you today. I love talking about this topic of social skills and how we can use the Bible to teach it. I was a reluctant homeschooler. I really did not want to homeschool my kids. And when God was just continuing to impress upon me that I should do it, I looked into it and I was very impressed by what I read, but I still didn't want to do that, especially because I felt like God was calling me to be a writer and a speaker. And I didn't see how I could homeschool and write and speak all at the same time. And then I realized, well, if God is asking me to do all three of those things, then he will work it out. So I tried it with a preschooler because I thought, I mean, how hard can it be to homeschool a preschooler? And I learned it was very, very hard for someone like me. I was just a disorganized person. I was very impatient. Two of the things that prospective homeschoolers tell me are, disqualifying for them to be homeschooling parents. And I just say, yeah, I get it. I was both of those things. And homeschooling taught me to be organized, taught me to be patient, and it ended up being the most fulfilling thing that I have done with my life. I absolutely loved it. It met the desires of my heart. It has created a family of people who are all so close to one another. And it's just been an absolute delight. And now even though my kids are graduated, I am on a mission to help homeschooling mothers make this lifestyle work for them because it has just been such a blessing for me.
I love hearing how you brought up that you weren't naturally organized, naturally patient, because so often, as I'm sure you have, someone will say, "Oh, I love the idea of homeschooling, but I'm just not patient enough to homeschool." And I'm like, "Girl, I am not either." But but I love how you were sharing how the Lord actually used homeschooling to change you. It wasn't just about your children, but it was your own personal growth as a mom. How are I mean that is one way for sure, but do you see other ways in which your perspective on homeschooling or educational philosophy grew or changed over the years?
Oh, for sure. When I started, I was actually really fortunate enough to find a curriculum that used books, stories as the basis for homeschooling, and we used five in a row, which many of your listeners may be familiar with, and I really enjoyed that. Then we moved on to doing some unit studies, which I also absolutely loved because it got us doing fun activities. I had four boys before I had a daughter, and those boys were very active and they loved anytime we did something practical to follow up on our reading and our studies. And eventually, I invited some acquaintances of mine through homeschooling to join us in doing activities that went along with our unit studies. And that ended up being our absolute favorite part of homeschooling itself. My kids made dear, dear friends. So did I. The husbands even became good friends, and we started vacationing together, going on field trips together. And it was just a wonderful way of homeschooling in those earlier years. Eventually, those kids graduated and I still had kids, younger kids at home. So we had to adjust our way of homeschooling. But so I went from being a unit study homeschooler, which I still think the world of. I think it's a wonderful way to learn. But then I became a lot more eclectic. I learned about classical education, and I learned about unschooling, and I incorporated more of those types of philosophies into kind of an organized whole without feeling like I had to follow the rules of any one approach. That just worked a lot better for me with my kids.
That's one of the joys of homeschooling over time, too, right? You just
Mhm.
grow in your confidence in doing what works best for your family and not necessarily following a checklist for a particular method.
Right, absolutely. I love the freedom of it. And I feel sorry, I guess is the best way to put it. I feel sorry for homeschooling moms who feel like they have to trade all of the rules of a traditional school setting for just a different set of rules, whether they're trying to be a Charlotte Mason homeschooler or an unschooler or using a particular boxed curriculum that I have to do all of these things that they say when you really don't. I mean, I think it's really great to learn by doing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you know what, I'm going to do just straight up Charlotte Mason this year and just see how that works for us. But then once you know what works for your family and what doesn't work for your family, then you can make some adjustments. And you're the general contractor for your kids' education, and you can adjust as you go along. And unless your state has a particular law or guideline that you have to follow, I mean, you really can experiment and just have fun with it.
Yeah, I love that's a great word picture, being the general contractor. Well, Melanie, what have
Yes.
been some of your favorite parts of homeschooling? And then maybe some of your less favorite, some of those challenges and how you sought to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, so I've already mentioned one of my favorite things was just doing a home-based co-op, which I think has so many advantages. Once my kids had gotten old enough that some of their friends had graduated, moved away, that happened too. Then we tried to invite other homeschoolers to join us in our home-based co-op, and I had just found that times had changed and most homeschoolers, at least in my area, were just reluctant to do a home-based co-op and preferred instead to go to a larger learning center where there were more kids that they could potentially make friends with. So I thought, well, I'm having no luck here. And so I put my kids into a learning center and just actually two. And it was not what we were hoping for. It was very difficult for them to make friends in that kind of setting because there wasn't time. There wasn't time for them to sit and talk together unless they were going to be there all day, which that wasn't my plan. That wasn't my goal as a homeschooling mom who wants my kids to be at home most of the time. So that was actually one of the things that was a challenge for me, was trying to adjust from a homeschool co-op model to a learning center model where my kids were going and taking classes. So that was one thing. And then I actually just I just published a podcast about this very thing, my five of my biggest challenges in homeschooling. And I would say that another one of those challenges was my kids not getting along. That drove me crazy. And I really wasn't expecting it like I should have. I mean, I didn't get along with my next youngest brother. I have a brother who is 11 years younger than me, and the dynamic just, is very, very different. But my brother, who is 2 years younger than me, we did not get along. And so I should not have been surprised that my kids had plenty of disagreements and issues. I guess I just thought, oh, I'm this Christian homeschooling mom, and we're going to spend so much time together, and we're going to study the Bible together, and we're going to deal with character issues. And so they'll be the best of friends just automatically. And that did not happen.
I think that is so important for homeschool moms to hear. So I come at this kind of the same experience with my own children, but from a different point of view. So I was homeschooled growing up. I have one brother, 4 years, 5 grades younger than I am.
Oh.
And he and I were always really close. Like, yeah, sometimes I'm sure I was a jerky older sister, but for the most part, like, I don't really have memory of fighting with him. I don't have memory of conflict with him. Had a really great relationship. And so I just assumed that my children would always get along. And I was horrified, shocked, and appalled at the way they treated one another. It's like,
Hmm.
you did not learn this from me. And so just having to kind of be like, oh, so again, like homeschooling doesn't make your children perfect. Okay, having
Hmm.
to work through those same sinful issues that anyone else does. People don't
Yeah.
always get along. Personalities sometimes clash.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah.
Well, Melanie, let's talk about socialization. It's a homeschool podcast after all.
Right.
I think a question I would ask about this, knowing what you're going to be talking about, is I would just say, don't children learn social skills naturally? And why would you say we actually need to more proactively teach them to children? Which is kind of funny to have this conversation after we discussed our own children's perhaps social ineptitude at times.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the first answer is that our children learn tremendous amounts about social skills just by virtue of being in a family. Even an only child learns so much as a member of our family. Most of our listeners right now are not living in a cabin, isolated from other people, never sees anyone. That's not a typical homeschooler today, right? So we all have opportunities for our kids to interact with other people, not just children, but with other people at church, when we go to the store, when we run our errands, when we go see a doctor, when we are interacting with our neighbors, we take them to events. I mean, of course, our kids are learning social skills all day, every day. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. And I also don't believe that homeschoolers need to learn social skills more than children who would attend a traditional school. I don't think that at all. What I do think, however, is that some children have a harder time picking up these skills that aren't explicitly taught. And we all know this, maybe outside of the realm of our parenting. We all know people who aren't picking up social cues that we think they should. you know, you aren't noticing that I don't have a happy expression on my face. Yet you're continuing to do what is upsetting me. There are people who don't pick up these skills, the cues, unless we help them and we teach them specifically what to look for or what to do. Whether you have a child who has special needs, or whether you have a child who maybe is just has some attentional deficits, and they aren't paying attention because they're just too busy doing what they're doing, or you just have a child who is neurologically typical, but for some reason just isn't that interested in that particular skill. So I do know that, because I was a practicing psychologist before I had a family. I know that there are people who can go through life and end up in adulthood not having learned some really important skills, because social skills also are connected to emotion management, emotional skills. And I found as a psychologist that I was teaching the same basic skills over and over and over to my clients. And it made me sad that people were having to spend over $100 an hour back then to see me to learn these things when they could have learned them in childhood. And so that is one of the things that I wanted to do, was to find a way to teach these skills to our kids so that they wouldn't have to see $100+ an hour therapist later in life.
And I know that you have said that you think stories are a really powerful teaching tool to teach these social skills. So, how are stories such a practical method of teaching these skills?
Right. It seems like they wouldn't be, because and you would be correct if you think that really what kids need is actual practice. Let's do some exercises, let's do some role playing. And absolutely, 100% kids do need that. But what I was struck by when I started researching reading and its effect on later life, what I noticed in the research is that people who read fiction actually have better relationships later in life. And one of the reasons for that is not just because of the story, although sometimes stories, the plot or the theme itself has something to do with relationships and that we can learn and be inspired by. That is for sure. But what we also get when we read or listen to a story is we get to hear a person's thinking. We get to hear about their feelings, even if we don't see them demonstrated. And in real life interactions, we don't have the benefit of knowing what someone else is thinking. And so stories can help us to empathize with other people where we might not empathize with them otherwise. The only thing we are maybe seeing is just the behavior. Maybe it's a problematic behavior and it's annoying. But if we know, oh, that's why this character did this. They did it because they thought this, and they had experienced these other things that were related. So stories are very powerful, at least I think, as a jumping off point to teach social skills.
Stories are so powerful, the way they form our imagination and orient our affections of what we think is true and good and all these
Mhm.
things. And of course, we know that the Bible is full of stories about real people who lived, full of stories. God revealed himself not in a textbook, right? He revealed himself in this story. But I think maybe a question that might come up is, you use Bible stories in your faith-based curriculum, but someone might be concerned and say, well, how do you make sure to use those stories in a way that still promotes the Bible as history, as something that is unique compared to other stories?
Right. So I have two versions of my social and emotional skills curriculum. In the secular version, I use fables and folk tales, which are obviously fictional stories. They're not true. In the faith-based version, I use Bible stories, which I treat as real history. These are things that really happened, just like if we were to read an account of a war gone by, um, a, a particular scientific discovery, if we read a biography about someone who was a major figure in history. Those stories are true. Now, we might have some of the facts wrong, but with the Bible, we know that it is the inspired word of God and we can trust it as true. In my experience, I have only seen Bible stories, Bible accounts, I'll call them that, Bible accounts used to teach maybe some morals, maybe some just theology, to learn more about God, to learn more about who we are as people. And those things are all so valuable. There are so many lessons that we can learn from reading accounts from Scripture. But what I haven't really seen is a study of these accounts based purely on the social and emotional skills of the people in these accounts. When I was really growing in my knowledge of Scripture, I did not read the Bible all the way through, except for just, like a few passages here and there, until I was expecting my second child. So for most of my life, I had not really read the Bible. And even when I began to read the Bible, I made the mistake of thinking, oh, so here is King David, or here is Moses. Here is a great leader from Bible times. And so everything that they do is good. I know you're laughing at that. And so then when I would come across something like what we know David did, I would just be confused, like, okay, this is
what do I do with this situation?
right. What do I do with this? And I mean, obviously that's an extreme example, right? I mean, it's very obvious that David did the wrong things. But there are other times when you wonder, okay, so Rahab lied to protect the Israelite spies, right? Is that right or wrong? That just becomes more of a conundrum, right? And so I wanted to go beyond that to looking at, why would this person in Bible history choose to behave this way? Because many times young children in particular, who haven't developed their social and emotional skills, they don't spend a lot of time thinking about what motivates behavior, why people would choose to behave in a certain way, and what the potential consequences of choices, behavior might be. So that is what I wanted to do with the Scriptures. So, for example, when the Apostle Paul, who was previously Saul persecuting the Christians, tried to join up with the Christian apostles, people were not too excited about that at first. And so I am asking kids to think about what might have motivated people to either trust Paul or not trust Paul. I mean, these are the kinds of issues that we have even today as adults. Who should we trust? Why should we trust them? On what basis do we make those decisions? And so it's really using the accounts from the Bible to get kids talking about behavior and social skills, the choices that we make. And I just have to say, though, that what we can trust as the right thing to do is anything that God or Jesus does in the Scriptures. Then we could say, okay, this is the right move, with the caveat that they are God and we are not. So there are some things that Jesus could and did do, and God did, that we are not capable of. But in terms of morality, for sure, we can say, yep, yep, that's a moral thing to do. But it's more in terms of let's think about what makes someone behave in a certain way without jumping to conclusions. Because this is what can really get kids and adults into trouble when we jump to conclusions about why someone does something.
And if we wait until there's some sort of conflict or issue we see with our children or in a social circle, and we've not had these conversations, there can be that defensiveness that kicks in if we're using their particular life experience as the way
Mhm,
to teach the lesson. But to
mhm.
have going to, hey, we're reading this story in the Bible. Let's talk about the way people are interacting with one another, thinking about motivations and relational decisions. It's kind of enough removed from their life where it doesn't have that same, I guess, defense mechanism that pops in. They can just sort of like, oh yeah, let's talk about this issue in a more neutral way.
Absolutely. And, I think this is something that we as homeschooling parents can do with any story, okay? Any account, fictional or nonfiction. We can be watching a movie and we can say, why did the character do that? What do you think they're thinking? What do you think they're feeling at this moment? Why would they be thinking that? And I think it is just a great practice for these social dilemmas that they're going to have later in life. And I was going to say that my adult children talk to me all the time about social dilemmas that they have. And in fact, it is the number one thing that people ask me about. Grown adults older than me ask me, what should I do? And so, the Bible is such an excellent place to go to really discuss these issues and learn social skills.
I think about that verse that says, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man, right? And God is
Mhm,
faithful and
mhm.
so on. But like, there is something about like just the shared human experience. We like to think that, oh, no one's ever faced this situation before. And maybe the details, not so much, but pretty much a common human experience most of the time. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. So true. Yeah, and I think, we can also, I was making the mistake of like, oh, okay, well, this is the good person from the Bible, and so everything they did was good. I think we can also think, oh, our culture is so evil. It's so terrible. And it really does feel like that. I get it. But when you truly think about the things that people did in Bible times, it doesn't look much worse. It doesn't really look much worse to me.
Yeah. There's something encouraging about that as well. Yeah.
It's true.
Oh, Melanie, one of the questions I just love to ask veteran homeschool moms when I have them on the podcast or just when I talk to them in my real life is what advice you would give as a veteran, experienced homeschool mom to your new homeschool mom self. If you could somehow go back in time and talk to yourself as a new homeschool mom, what do you wish that you had known back then?
So that is an easy one for me, and I can answer it in two words: trust God. That is my biggest regret. It was my biggest time waster. It was my biggest source of anxiety, discouragement, not trusting God. And if I could go back and do it differently, that is what I would do. I would trust God because if you do trust Him, everything else is easier. If you don't, everything is going to be a challenge. Everything is going to be difficult. So I encourage a new homeschooling mom to daily make that decision. I wish you could just make it once, but I think we have to just do it daily. Okay, I'm going to trust God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. I have said that to myself so many times. And I honestly don't regret saying it to myself because I need to hear it.
Yeah, as I think it's Paul, right? He's like, it doesn't hurt you to hear it again, and it's easy for me to say it again. So let me just
Hmm.
remind you. And we need those things. We are so it's so easy for us to forget those things. But trusting
True.
the Lord again, walking by faith, not by sight. That
Right.
is our hope as homeschool moms. Yeah.
That's it.
Well,
Yeah.
this has been a lovely conversation. I know it will be encouraging to the moms who hear. Here at the end, I want to ask you questions. I'm asking all my guests this season. So the first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
So I am reading the Youth with a Mission version of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's biography. I was reading another biography of his, and just honestly, it was a slog. And then I switched over to the YWAM version, and I just wonder what took me so long. I absolutely love their biographies. I think they're gripping. I used to read them aloud to my children. They would beg for another chapter. And this one has been so enlightening because I have always wondered about Bonhoeffer's motivations for what he did um, during Hitler's reign. And so it's a social and emotional skills story that I can ask myself questions about. And it's just fascinating to me in terms of history. And um, I'm always inspired when I read a Christian biography. It just makes all of my little cares and woes seem so insignificant when you read about these people who face life and death situations, for their faith. It's like, okay, I think I can get through today.
Yes. Is that the series by Janet and Jeff Benj?
It is.
Okay,
It
yeah, I
is.
have some kids who have read several of those as well and enjoyed them. We love missionary biographies. Church
Mhm.
history is a huge thing in our family. In fact, two of my daughters are co-hosts on the Kids Talk Church History podcast. And so, just like you were saying, when you study church history and you see the way God has equipped and sustained his church through a lot of times very ordinary people, it is so
Mhm.
encouraging and gives
It is.
us great faith and hope for today, our lives. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, the
Yes.
final question I have for you is, what would be your best tip for dealing with homeschool day or maybe a homeschool season that just seems to be going completely wrong?
So I have been there so many times. And I will tell you about one particular day when I was just exhausted, and I just sat down and prayed. The kids were just I think they were literally running around me. But I'm just sitting there praying. And I felt like the Lord said to me, yeah, of course you're exhausted because you're trying to do everything for these kids. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. I'm trying to do it all when that is not my job. That is not what he has called me to do. So I would say probably 99% of the time when it just wasn't going well, that was the problem that the Lord revealed to me after I prayed, is that I'm trying to do too much more than what he has called me to do. So that would be my number one tip for you. And everything else is kind of gravy after that.
Oh, that is a great encouragement. I love that. Thank you, Melanie. I needed to hear that today
Sure.
too. We all need to hear that many times. Melanie, where can people find you all around the internet?
Yeah, so my podcast is the Homeschool Sanity Show. You can find that on any podcast player. The actual website is homeschoolsanity.com. And I sell my curriculum, Training Aliens. That is the social and emotional skills curriculum I was talking about. And Grammar Galaxy, which is also a story-based language arts curriculum. That is available at Fun to Learn Books. You can find me on social media at Homeschool Sanity is probably the best place to look.
Okay. And I will have links to all of those things in the show notes for this episode at humilityanddoxology.com. I would love it if you are listening or watching today to screenshot the shows, share it in your social media, tag me and Melanie, tell a friend. Word of mouth is still the best way to let your friends know about new homeschool podcasts. And I am so glad to have been able to chat with you, Melanie, to get to know you a little bit more over the past couple weeks. And I look forward to chatting with you again. So until next time, happy homeschooling.